Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Hare Krishna. Oh, you can get on. Okay, great. Okay, thanks. All right.
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Please accept the humble obeisance. God. Welcome to this morning Srimad Bhagavatam 2, Cosmic Manifestation. Chapter 10, Bhagavad is the answer to all questions in text 22. We're very fortunate to have His Dronacarya Prabhu, Temple President, ISKCON, Philadelphia, to give the class. Hare Krishna, Prabhu, please accept humble obeisances. All glory to Bhagavad.
Hare Krishna, Harrisburg family. It's great to see you this morning. I'm sure it's as cold and icy in Harrisburg as it is in Philadelphia. During these times, it's especially hard to stay motivated. It's great to see everybody. As devotees, we can stay motivated by remaining dedicated to our service of hearing and chanting and other services, devotional service that have been prescribed, especially morning sadhana. Stay strong during these times that are difficult to be motivated. Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindhuvyeva patitanam manevyo vaishnavevyo namo namaha. Jaya Radha Ma Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavala Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Vanachari Jaya Radha Ma Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Girivardhari Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Janaranjana Ravanachari Jamuna Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paribrajacharya Ashotatara Shishi Madhis Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Grace Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Thakur Maharaj Ki
Yay.
Ananta Kotanda Ki
Yay.
Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki
Yay.
Prem Skaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Gaura Bhaktivinoda Ki
Yay.
Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shyam Kunda Radha Kundan Ki
Yay.
Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki
Yay.
Navadvip Mayapur Dham Ki
Yay.
Ganga Maya Ki
Yay.
Bhakti Devi Ki
Yay.
Tulsi
Yay.
Shri Harinam Sankhi
Yay.
Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki
Yay.
Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Nitai Gora Premanande.
Hare.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories to the assembled devotees.
Hare Krishna.
All glories, all glories, all glories to the lotus feet of Shri Shri Guru and Shri Guru. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Tirtha Swamini Namane. Namaste Krishna Padaya Prabhupada Shri Guru Karuna Shakti Bhakti Tirtha Swamini Namane. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namane. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye Nasta Prayeshu Abhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttamash Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtuki. Before reciting Srimad Bhagavatam, let us offer our respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Narayan, unto the supermost human beings, Narayan Rishis, unto the goddess of learning, Mother Saraswati, and unto the author, Srila Vyasadeva. By regular attendance in classes on Srimad Bhagavatam and rendering service to the pure devotees, all that is troublesome to the heart becomes almost destroyed. The devotional service is one's heart as an irrevocable fact. Srimad Bhagavatam 10:22. Bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir astaj jighṛkṣataḥ karṇau cha nirabhidyetāṁ diśaḥ śrotraṁ guṇa-grahaḥ. bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir ātmanas jighṛkṣataḥ cha nirabhidyetāṁ diśaḥ śrotraṁ guṇa. bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir ātmanas jighṛkṣataḥ karṇau cha nirabhidyetāṁ diśaḥ śrotraṁ guṇa-grahaḥ. Please chant.
bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir ātmanas jighṛkṣataḥ karṇau cha nirabhidyetāṁ diśaḥ śrotraṁ guṇa-grahaḥ. Hare Krishna.
bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir ātmanas jighṛkṣataḥ karṇau cha nirabhidyetāṁ diśaḥ śrotraṁ guṇa-grahaḥ. Hare Krishna.
bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir ātmanas jighṛkṣataḥ karṇau cha nirabhidyetāṁ diśaḥ śrotraṁ guṇa-grahaḥ. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else?
bodhyamānasya ṛṣibhir ātmanas jighṛkṣataḥ karṇau ca nirabhidyetāṁ śrotraṁ guṇa-grahaḥ. Hare Krishna.
Anyone else? Okay, we'll do synonyms. Bodhyamānasya, to understand. Rishi, by the authorities. Ātmana, of the Supreme Being. Tat, that. Jighṛkṣataḥ, when he desired to take up. Karṇau, the ear. Cha, also. Nirabhidyetāṁ, became manifested. Diśaḥ, direction or god of air. Śrotraṁ, the power of hearing. guṇa-grahaḥ, and the objects of hearing. Translation in Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. By development of the desire of the great to know, the ears, the power of hearing, controlling deity of hearing, and the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desire to hear about the self. Purport. As stated in the Bhagavad Gita, by advancement of knowledge, we know about the Supreme Lord, the summum bonum of everything. Knowledge only of nature or physical knowledge, which are working under the direction of the Lord. The scientists are eager to hear about the physical laws with material nature. They are eager to hear through the medium of radio and television about things taking place far away from them on other planets. But they should know that the power of hearing and the instruments of hearing were given to them by the Lord for hearing about the self, or about the Lord. Unfortunately, the power of hearing is misused in the hearing of the vibrations of affairs. The great sages were interested in hearing about the Vedic knowledge and nothing more. That is the beginning of oral reception of knowledge. Om Aganatimbarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmiliyatam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. I was born in the darkness of ignorance, and my ears opened my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer respectful obeisances unto the verse once again. By development of the desire of great sages to know, the ears of hearing, the controlling deity of, and the objects of hearing became manifested. The great sages desired to hear about the self. This is a very informative section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, because it talks about how the various senses of the body came to be. And it was all due to the Lord's desire. And in this case, we see the great, the original created sages, their desire. For instance, if we go back, I'll just read back a couple of verses that have been covered already. When the Supreme Purusha, who is in this case, when the Supreme Purusha desired to smell odors and respiration were generated, the nasal instruments, the nose, and the odors came into existence, and the controlling deity of air also became manifested. So that's how we got the power of smell and the nose, and then what was covered on day by when everything existed in darkness, the Lord desired to see himself and all that was created. Then the eyes, the illuminating God's Son, and the power of vision and the objects of sight manifested. So that's the power of, or the facility of the eyes, sight, and the objects that could be seen. And then it's the ears. And this was because the great sages desire to know. And the way that knowledge is transmitted is through sound and into the ear. So the power of hearing, controlling deity. And these were all manifested at this time. So it's quite fascinating to know. Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, scientists are very eager to hear about the physical laws working in material nature. This is kind of the basis of science, is to try to understand how material nature works, to be able to study it, understand its qualities, record patterns, and make various calculations of how interaction of various objects come into being with one another. But outside laws that can be measured, the physical senses, or measured through instruments that were created by the physical body. That's actually outside realm of science. Two ways of acquiring. One is through perception, pratyaksha, by our senses trying to, what we can actually physically see, hear, touch, smell, taste. This is, what using our physical senses to do that. But then, in addition to that, there's ātmanas, and that is what our minds can actually rationalize. It's still based on the physical body. We draw conclusions, even though we have to physically see it. We can say, if A is true and B is true, and have a relationship with one another, we can draw certain conclusions, even though we may not physically be able to see it. So it involves the aspect of the mind and logic. But both of those are not absolute, they're not complete. And anything with the physical body, we know has its limitations. The senses are imperfect. In fact, there's things that can't be seen to die. Even with the most powerful microscopes, as well as the most powerful telescopes, that which can be microscopes seeing the smallest, microscopes seeing the biggest. They're constantly powerful ones that can drill down even in more detail and expand to try to capture even the biggest things. And it's a work in progress. But even with that, we may draw certain conclusions to things that are not beyond their perception. For instance, the way the planets are structured, the way the Earth, these are all being calculated based on certain observations. But then there's a gap, there's a leap. And then using logic, which is not necessarily infallible, it's very fallible. In fact, the laws and theories that are put forth, that's what they call them, theories. They're not necessarily absolute conclusions. They often change as more information becomes available. So there's this other category of understanding and acquiring knowledge, and that is sabda. And we often absolute authority. And for us, this means the words of the scriptures, descending knowledge. These other categories of perception, pratyaksha, and logical conclusions, ānumanas. This is ascending now things by starting at our position and working. But this other process of sabda, it's actually descending down from the Supreme Lord himself, the disciplic succession. And this is, sometimes it's inconceivable and imperceivable with the senses. But this knowledge has the ability to actually transform and develop us on a level physical. So, when they had a desire to hear, their desire was to hear about the self. And particularly, it's a big S. Srila Prabhupada writes this as S, to hear about the self. That means the Supreme Lord. They had a desire to hear about their origin, the qualities, and the activities of the self, the Supreme Self. This is obviously something that goes beyond our perception, being able to calculate or logically. This is why the ears were created. He writes that, here. The power of hearing is misuse of mundane affairs. It helps when we understand why the ears were created, various senses were created. And we hear about this sometimes, mostly in circles in Krishna consciousness. It's very helpful to understand that the ears were created for a particular purpose. And if we learn this from the very beginning of life, then we may not misuse even these instruments. But from the very beginning of life, we're taught that actually they're for your pleasure. And we put so many things in front of us to hear: the radio, the television, we talk to various people, friends, relatives, and they're talking, we're hearing. But most of the time, it's not about the self. We're just simply talking about activities in this world. We're watching TV shows about other people's lives, about fictional circumstances. They give us comfort. We listen to various types of music that are covered by the different, sometimes ignorance, sometimes passion, sometimes goodness. And then we also various conversations. And then that the name, there's spiritual sangha, there's guṇa-grahaḥ, and oftentimes prajalpa, the order as practitioners of Krishna consciousness, we should understand that prajalpa is very powerful in a negative way, and the ears can actually become misused and pull ourselves outside of the realm of spiritual and actually drag us down into a material level of existence. Prajalpa means gossip, hearing activities that are not related to elevating ourself into Krishna consciousness. Unnecessary hearing, because with the speaking also comes the hearing. So the hearing process, there's no doubt that it's being misused to hear sound vibrations of mundane activities of the world. And the great sages, they were inquiring about the Lord. So I just wanted to share verses, hearing process. And I think I kind of personally came away with, when reading this this part, of the importance of how we can utilize our senses as the Lord intended when they were created, in order to elevate out of this material condition of life and into our most natural condition, our spiritual condition. In the 13th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, it talks about the different ways in which people are able to perceive the self, the super soul, the big S. Some perceive the super soul within themselves through meditation, others through the cultivation of knowledge, and still others through working without fruit of desire. There are also those who begin to worship the Supreme Person by hearing about him from others. And this hearing process is celebrated in our lineage, actually as the topmost form out of the ones that are given here. Acquiring knowledge, guṇa, performing Astanga, which ultimately leads through meditation, and then karma yoga, working in a pious way without fruit of desires, sacrificing one's activities for the pleasure of. These can be very difficult, and even through, and they steps. And it's only at the later stages that one actually gets some connection with the Supersoul. However, from the very beginning of the hearing process, Shravan, one actually learns about the Supreme Personality. And this is what we practice. When you hear about the different stages of yoga, for instance, yamas and then niyamas, which are the do's and don'ts. Then you have the physical exercises, the yoga postures, the asanas, and then there's the pranayama, which all this is to be able to control the body and the mind. And then you get into, some more discipline of meditation and controlling the minds, the dhyana, withdrawal and being under control of the senses. And then and if you're under the proper guidance, Supersoul. For some, that meditation is the impersonal Brahman, but it takes a while just to get to the point. Same thing with the process of Jnana Yoga, where one is simply just acquiring through the Vedas in a scrutinizing way. It involves some process of meditation, but for the most part, you're using your own mind to be able to generate conclusions of what the Supreme Being is. All times we find in the school of Jnana Yoga, so many different commentators all come up with different conclusions. Srila Prabhupada quotes this one verse that says, a person cannot be a Muni unless he has actually creates his own theories and beliefs. So university would have its own different, not just teaching methods of the information. So when we come to a Hare Krishna temple, actually from the very beginning, from the moment you walk in the door, you learn about the Supreme Person. If you receive a book on the street, and you first couple pages, you will understand there is a personality of Godhead, and his name is Krishna. We are conditioned souls that have lost our relationship with Krishna by turning away from Krishna, this material world, struggling with our various senses, trying to figure out, where can actually our happiness belongs with our relationship with Krishna. The process of devotional service is how we with Krishna. This is the power of the hearing process. We can awaken our dormant love for Krishna. Just as we use our alarm clocks in the morning, and it goes off, and it wakes us up. The power they can awaken us up from our sleeping here in the world. There is I'll mention a couple verses, the hearing process. There's this one is stated very nice. This is from the Nectar of Instruction, Nectar of Devotion. It's quoted from the Narada Pancharatra. Famous verse, Sar Muktam, Tat Prat Vena Nirmalam, Rishikena Rishikesha Sevanachate. Bhakti, or devotional service, means engaging all our senses in the service of the Lord. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master of the Supreme Person, Bhakti or devotional service means engaging all our senses in the service of the Lord, who is the Supreme Personality of God, Master of all senses. When the spirit soul renders service unto the Supreme, two side effects. One is freed from all material designations, upadhis, and one's senses are purified simply by being employed in the service of the Lord. So this is what happens when we begin the process of hearing about Krishna and using our senses in the service of the Lord. And this verse ties very nicely into today's Srimad Bhagavatam verse, because it talks about how to utilize the senses for their original purpose. When we use our ears to hear about topics of the material world, we actually pull ourselves away from Krishna. When we hear about relating to Krishna and transcendental activities, the senses become purified by being employed in the service of the Lord. So this is actually a definition that's given of Bhakti Yoga, that all our senses should be engaged in the senses of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We also understand we have spiritual that Krishna also has spiritual senses. The senses that are being created and talked about here are those that are in the material world. But in our original spiritual form, it's not that we don't have these things. It's just that in the material world, our senses are being used to acquire material understandings, knowledge, and actually create our attached material situation. But the very thing that can cause our bondage, if properly used, can actually be what is used to liberate. The tongue can be used for speaking different. It can also be used for chanting the Lord's holy name. It can be used for speaking about Krishna's pastimes and Krishna's philosophy. Or it can be used for about sports, politics, economics, So a famous devotee that's glorified throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, Ambarish. There's a famous verse that talks about absorption in devotional service and how he used all his senses for the service of the Lord, and thus he became a pure devotee. Srila Prabhupada Ambarish is concerned. He actually performed all the items of devotional service. He first of all engaged his mind in thinking about the lotus feet of Krishna. He engaged his power of speaking in describing the deities of the Supreme Personality of God, and washing the temple of his ears in hearing the words of Krishna, eyes in beholding the beautiful. He engaged his sense of touch by rendering service to the devotees, and he engaged his sense of smell in relishing the fragrance of flowers offered. So this is the that we're given of Maharaj Ambarish. The ideal devotee utilizes senses for their original purpose, and thus having those senses be the source of our deliverance from this material world. This, a famous story with Srila Prabhupada when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, not the first meeting, but the second meeting. The second meeting in Vrindavan. This was, believe it or not, close to 11 years after Srila Prabhupada first met Saraswati Thakur in 1922. And that was when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur told Srila Prabhupada at that time that, you should preach the message of Lord, and if you ever to the West and take this message. That last on our Srila Prabhupada. And for the next years, he tried to, follow Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati directions. And he would visit temples. At that time, he moved up to Allahabad. He would go to the temples after work and on weekends. Money, he would bring friends and colleagues, to the temple. Sometimes he would lead the bhajans. And he had Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was in Vrindavan, a yatra, a pilgrimage. So he went to there, and on the last day, Thakur was going to be there. So when he arrived, checked in, and they were having, and one of the leaders, made an announcement saying that tonight they're going to do a tour to Sheshashayi Vishnu Temple, and then to and Srila Bhakti lecturing. And this is be the last night because he'll be leaving early in the morning. So Srila Prabhupada and me, the reason I came here was to get the association of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and he could hear everybody talking. Okay, we're going to go visit, this temple, with going on pilgrimage and visiting temples. But the power of hearing transforms us. That's why the sadhu sangha is kind of being more purified than taking a bath. You take a bath in the Ganges, you may remove your sins temporarily. Inclinations will still remain. But here, sadhu, they can actually cut through the knots of this material world. Prabhupada knew that, so he went to hear from Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. And he was surprised to see that only a few people to him. For hours, Krishna, Srila Prabhupada would comment. Some of it I could understand, some of it I couldn't, but I just knew, hearing his words, these words would actually deliver. And as the night went on, some people had various to perform, so they had to get up and leave. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur visited Allahabad opening, and the resident sannyasi who was introduced Charan to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, and Abhay Charan had requested, he says, I would like to become his disciple officially, that he's coming. Is it possible that I become initiated by him? So the temple sannyasi there, he introduced them, and he was going on about Srila Prabhupada's accolades. Oh, he comes to the temple very much, he gives nice donations, he encourages his colleagues to come, and he enjoys the bhajans. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he said, through that all, he says, yes, I know him. He likes to hear. Go away. I have marked him. And yes, I will accept him as my disciple. So this power of hearing is something in our lineage, specifically to, our Srila Prabhupada and his connection with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And that is a very practical example of being able to utilize sense of hearing in its proper way, so that we're delivered from this material world and go back home, back to God. See if we have any questions or comments. I'd like to hear if anybody has any realizations on the process of hearing and how it's helped you.
Yay. Thank you very much for a nice lecture. The power of hearing may be very important. That's why what was coming to me as I was hearing you, the process itself, the Shastra, it's called Shruti. And Shruti is Shastra, that is heard, that you have to hear. So important here. And so that crossed my mind when you were talking about that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Dear devotees, this is a time to unmute yourself. Very good attendance today. And please, you've heard. And now you can comment about your own experiences about hearing some things that are into you, or some of the takeaways they have lecture. Or if you have questions, ask questions. The entire thing is a hearing and the process, literally. So unmute yourself and join in and ask questions. Hare Krishna. Any questions or comments? Anyway, I'd just like to make another comment.
Yes, Prabhu.
That of hearing, it's happened so many times. Bhagavad Gita was heard by Arjuna when Krishna was speaking. Srimad Bhagavatam was heard by Maharaj Pariksit when Shukadeva Goswami was speaking. The list goes on. There's so many situations. Lord Kapila speaking to his mother. It's all hearing process. And my own experience lately, back, I wound up to be there for a number of weeks and then a rehabilitation center. And the body was not able to do much. So the only thing left for me to do is just hear. He had heard the whole mantra. Srila Prabhupada's, there's one on YouTube that's about 10 hours and 47 minutes. So that just keeps playing. And I got a few questions asked by the nurses what I'm to. So I got a chance to explain to them. But it was, again, through the process of hearing. And in the rehabilitation place, I was there for 2 weeks. I had plenty of time to listen to Bhagavats on YouTube again. And it was very, 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 very exciting. It gave me a very wonderful connection with Sisi Nitai Gaurachandra, Gaura Nitai, because it's all about Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and associates in Chaitanya Bhagavat. So much to learn from them and how they were relating to the Supreme Lord. So yeah, hearing is very powerful. So that was a comment that I wanted to add to.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought up those examples because of our script and your personal example. That's a great one. But in our scriptures, like as you mentioned, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, this is all about hearing. In fact, we'll hear, we'll read Krishna. He starts off several of the chapters of the Bhagavad Gita with this term Tak Shrinu. Arjuna, just hear. Arjuna, just hear this. Just hear. He'll say this over and over again. And at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, what does he say? He says, Arjuna, attentive mind, are your doubts and illusions now dispelled? 18:2. So he wants to hear. And we heard this with an attentive mind. Not just passive listening, but active listening. The reason it's so powerful, Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport to Srimad Bhagavatam 1.2.17 that whenever, therefore, offenseless hearing and glorification of God are undertaken, it is understood that Lord Krishna is present there in the form of transcendental, which is as powerful Lord personally. So having these material senses, this is how we actually receive the Lord, through the sound, the medium of His personally present. And we hear about this in the form of the holy name. There's none different than Krishna. But the same applies to the words that are about Krishna and heard that are Krishna from the author. And then about Srila Rupa Goswami, right? And he starts desiring many years, millions of years. He says, Srila Rupa Goswami, when I hear when I begin to chant, I desire to have millions of ears and millions of tongues so that I could relish the spiritual bliss of chanting the Lord's holy names. So there's a level of spiritual we see from the example of Rupa Goswami that it may get to the point of in spiritual perfection where our ears aren't enough. Right now, sometimes we think, okay, I heard enough. Okay, it's been an hour, it's been 20 minutes, I read, I heard a lecture for 15, 20 minutes, or I've chanted for 2 hours. That's enough. I give, my ears have had enough. But when we see about Srila Rupa Goswami, he's actually saying that, my ears aren't enough. I want more. I wish I had more ears to be able to get more of it. So we have a long ways to go, and never feel that we have completed our devotional service in the process of hearing and chanting, because actually it's unlimited. It's an interesting kind of way to end this. Is how sometimes we have our sadhana and we feel good when we complete our sadhana, but we're really only scratching the surface to the point where we get to unlimited hearing, unlimited chanting.